towing the line between amazement and feeling like an exhibit at Tyler University, an extraterrestrial wonder of interplanetary genius that extended over the horizon like a silver spiderweb hung in the universe. Ethan Veen, the only human on campus, found himself each day towing the line between the two sensations. Each student and researcher brought their own distinct physiology, culture, and aspirations to the university, which attracted students and researchers from all across the galaxy. Ethan had accomplished the most extraordinary of accomplishments by being accepted into the elite xenogenetics program while he was working at a zoo. Given the widespread perception that the human species is physiologically unique, this was an exceptionally notable finding. Despite this, Ethan did not seem to mind the fact that he was the first human participant in the program. He accepted his position as an outsider with a combination of humor and drive, and his fellow alien students couldn't fail to be incessantly interested about him. A multitude of concerns were posed to him, including whether or not the only reason humans exist is because of symbiotic bacteria and how our species developed without the ability to produce bioluminescence. Ethan, on the other hand, was enthusiastic at the possibility of being the focus of everyone's attention. He found that the equipment, on the other hand, was not designed to accommodate hands with 5 fingers, and the lecture rooms were often sized to suit pupils who had prenatal disorders or floating anatomy. As Ethan attempted to go through chambers in which the gravity abruptly shifted to accommodate animals with different characteristics, he fell flat on his face on many occasions. Pupils fall flat on their stomachs and, when suspended from their feet, can eventually regroup themselves in difficult situations. A towering extraterrestrial being with 6 iridescent eyes and silver scales that flowed like water, Professor Zaro supported his pupils in a comparative xenogenomics class by using his signature authoritative presence and a firm faith in the efficacy of scientific inquiry. Ethan was able to gain the reluctance of his students to respect him, as well as the acceptance of Professor Zaro, despite the fact that he had no wings. Ethan sat up taller, not just curious, but also scared, as the class walked to the neighboring lab, which was a circular room dominated by a brilliant center console. It had taken him the first month of the semester to figure out how to avoid freezing his samples by mistake. The laboratory apparatus, which was sleek and crystalline, was famously difficult to work with. Following this, the samples would be studied in order to demonstrate the significant differences in genetic architecture that exist across the cosmic region. Before slipping his fingertip into the analyzer, Ethan took a deep breath, stabbed his finger with a sterile sample instrument, and obtained a single drop of blood from his fingertip. Following the projection of the samples onto the center display, the genetic markers were seen to pulse with elaborate patterns of light and color. A Zimmerian, a crystalline creature whose body reflected light into magnificent rainbows, were among the beings that were engaged in this incident. Orelon, a shimmering mist form, delicately swirled a piece of itself into the machine, while a minute fragment of the creature dissolved into the analyzer. Both instances occurred simultaneously. After placing the tray into the analyzer, he stepped back so that he could see the machine as it began to function. Given the lively, multidimensional genomes of his classmates, it was not surprising that the early findings indicated a series of markers that identified him as a human being. In spite of this, Ethan continued to have a tinge of embarrassment due to the fact that his DNA seemed simple and sometimes even charming. The computer stopped, flashing a faint red sign on the central display and a series of diagnostic alarms in a language that Ethan was unable to comprehend. He had seen enough comparative studies to expect this, but the machine still gave him pause. The professor murmured something about something that was out of the usual when Ethan got closer to the console during the conversation. Ethan's face softened into a frown as he said, "What's wrong?" At the same time as he was cycling through the data, Zaro's clawed paw hovered over the buttons and said, The analyzer detected an abnormality and your genome, as his voice reverberated throughout the laboratory. He reassured the audience that the apparatus in question seldom generated inaccurate results. It was possible for Ethan to sense the weight of his. There was a wide variety of responses from classmates, ranging from questions to doubts. Despite the fact that he didn't really believe it, Ethan couldn't help but imply that it may be a typographical error. As the light reflected off of Zaro's silver scales, he cocked his head to the side, making it seem as if it was not possible. The calibration of these devices is quite thorough, which means that irregularities are uncommon but not unheard of. After class, Zaro continued to work on fixing the problem, as Ethan unwillingly shook his head and said, "Okay, if that helps, I'll submit another example." Zaro gave a little sign of approval. By this time, Ethan had already gone on to the subsequent group. Although his friends continued to submit their samples, Ethan found it difficult to concentrate on the task at hand. The genomes of his classmates illuminated the screen with intricate patterns that hinted at the existence of evolutionary miracles. Ethan's uneasiness, on the other hand, had increased as the session was drawing to a conclusion, and he lingered while his classmates spoke out their hushed thoughts, trailing in their wake like smoke. Zalu remarked, "Do not let this scare you, Mr. Vale." His tone was measured and uneven, and he turned to him as the laboratory was emptying out. "The circumstances are not always negative, rather they are just fascinating." That evening, when Ethan was back in his dorm room, he couldn't help but grin about something. However, while he continued to gaze at the little red dot that was located on his fingertip, which was the location where he had taken blood, he mentally relived the events that had transpired during the day. If it had been an error or if there was something in his DNA that he was unaware of, his thoughts were drawn to the oddity like a moth to a flame. He wondered whether it had been a mistake. His inability to fall asleep was accompanied with a cloud of restless energy that he carried with him into the next morning. The abnormality caused him to have a tingling sensation in his head. A message from Professor Zaro and Mr. Veen arrived on Ethan's holocom in the middle of the day. The message informed him that the bioinformatics annex had been subjected to extra study, which had resulted in major discoveries. As Ethan approached the assigned lab, which was one of the most modern buildings on campus, with gleaming hallways bristling with alien technology, he found Zaro waiting for him. Kurt's phrase did not succeed in calming Ethan's worries, and he found Zaro anticipating his arrival. A researcher who specializes in crystalline Zeeman and a Saracen with wide shoulders, segmented arms, and a middle-of-the-day expression were there when Mr. Veen Zaro motioned for Ethan to take a seat and said, "We've analyzed your genome using the additional samples you provided." Ethan sat down, his heart pounding with confusion, and asked, "What do you mean by unprecedented?" Zyman Research's voice chimed like distant bells as it clarified that certain sequences in Ether's DNA did not match the genetic patterns recorded for humans or any known Earth species. Sequences are also similar to those of a species that was considered to be extinct for a very long time, the Kari. The Saracen leaned forward as Ethan repeated the name, which had a peculiar tone to it. Her voice was quick and precise. The Kari were a species that were renowned for their extraordinary adaptability. They were able to survive in settings full of radiation, high gravity, and other conditions that would have been fatal to the majority of other forms of life. On a molecular level, their DNA even enabled them to adapt to these severe conditions. Seeing the shimmering hologram of his genome, which revealed patterns that matched those of the recorded Kavari sequences, Ethan peered at it with a sense of intense curiosity. It was unclear how he might have received Kavari DNA from human parents. This was the issue that remained unresolved. Zaro's 6 iridescent eyes narrowed as he said, "We don't know how the Ka have been extinct for over Zero cycle. Zaro's eyes narrowed as he added this. Ethan leaned back and calmed himself by running his fingers through his hair as he tried to calm himself down. The analyzer does not make errors, Saracen said in a direct manner. There must be some mistake. Ethan felt a knot build in his gut just as the holo display in the room began to flicker to life, which caused him to be on the verge of responding. The question that Saracen posed was, "Am I some type of experiment?" "There is no evidence to show that you were designed," Zara responded. "There is no proof. It is possible that this finding might have far-reaching repercussions for science, history, and even galactic politics. However, if the Carr bloodline continues to exist in you, then this discovery presents significant problems." The light brought into existence a form that seemed to be ethereal, with veins of violet color shining. The individual in question was Professor Zaro, who serves as the administrator of the Interstellar Scientific Council. An authoritative tone could be heard in the voice of the entity, as it said, "We have received your report. The Council demands an urgent briefing on this anomaly. A possible paradigm change is represented by the existence of key markers in a live body, as Mr. Zaro explained further." The glowing eyes of the administrator flipped toward Ethan. "The abnormality is too momentous to keep inside the limits of the university. Mr. Veen, this is not a request. Concerns of this scale are within the jurisdiction of the Council, and your cooperation is required." When Ethan questioned, "What if I don't want to go?" the administrator's eyes were fixed on him as he talked. Ethan tightened his hands and posed the question directly. As he talked, Ethan's heart began to rapidly beat. It was abundantly evident that the Interstellar Scientific Council was anxious about discoveries coming from other parts of the galaxy that may disrupt the equilibrium of the galaxy. In spite of the fact that his thoughts were racing, he hesitated before asking when they wanted to meet. As soon as the broadcast came to an end, the atmosphere in the room became completely quiet. The administrator added, "Prepare yourselves." Zaro shifted his attention to Ethan, his tone being very soft. With a blank nod, Ethan acknowledged that the magnitude of the problem was pushing down on him like a physical weight. "This will be a tough journey, Mr. Veen, but know that you are not alone in this." The reason he had traveled to Aura's Prime was to research genetics, but suddenly everything was different, because his DNA patterns flashed on his computer screen in glowing patterns against a dark backdrop. In an effort to clear his mind, Ethan started his day by taking a leisurely walk around the empty corridors of Tyler's core campus. There was a conspicuous absence of the typical flurry of activity. He could almost say that all of the students at the institution were aware of what was about to happen. Before the time that was requested, he came at the meeting room already there. Holograms showing star charts and historical biological data were affixed to the walls of the large chamber, which was packed with them. Circular tables with high-ranking delegates from many galactic civilizations were arranged in the center of the room, surrounded the chairs. With a deliberate lack of sound, the members of the council entered the chamber, so establishing their authority over the environment. Each member represented a distinct species of Zaro, and the black scales on their bodies gave the impression that they were. The representative of Elan began by stating, "You are here because your presence raises issues that must be addressed." The tendrils of the Vit sparkled as it contributed. "You bear the heritage of the Kari." Although Ethan felt embarrassed as their eyes landed on him, he pushed himself to meet theirs for whatever reason. Crystalline Zimmer in refracting rainbows, a Vord with luminous tendrils, and a towering Koran whose segmented form emanated an aura of silent dread, were all there as the tableau unfolded in front of them. The Auralin seemed to be translucent and emitting a faint light, Each bright eye of the Zaro council member narrowed as it pushed forward. The genetic markers that are present in your DNA provide the impression that this is not the case. They are in agreement with sequences that are exclusive to the key variety and are purposeful, ancient, and exact. Because he was raised on Earth and his parents are human, Ethan paused and said, "I don't know. To the best of my knowledge, my family does not have any ties to entities that are not of our own." With a slight click, the segmented body of the Koran moved as it spoke for the very first time. "In addition to being a bearer of HFY characteristics, you are more than that. A testimonial to your leadership talents is the exceptional flexibility you have to adapt in challenging settings. At what point in time did you first become aware of anything that was out of the norm, Mr. Vane?" While Ethan was on the Arctic excursion, he thought on his experience there, particularly the storm and how his body had acclimated to the frigid conditions without the assistance of his suit. "Your survival skills at that distance are amazing," Derek said. The storm had the potential to be devastating. But something had changed. His body had acclimated to the cold. He admitted this when they were on the field trip. "At the time, I didn't give it much consideration. But when the Ziman chimed quietly, its crystalline tones tinted with wonder. Hemako. Ivari, adaptability, help you live. I didn't give it much thought today." Abraham. As the significance of those remarks began to sink in, the room fell into complete silence. Ethan had the impression that he was sitting on the precipice of something enormous and unfathomable. "Do you understand the importance of this, Mr. Vane?" The Auralan voice decreased its volume. "It's not enough to say that the Carri were adaptive. They were also creators. They changed ecosystems, improved their chances of survival, and flourished in places where others had failed. The fact that their heritage continues to live on in you is a representation of your relationship to a species. I didn't ask for this. I'm just a student. I didn't know about the Kavari until yesterday." The Vade's luminous tendrils pulsed faintly. "Knowledge carries responsibility. You may not have asked for this, but now that you know, you must decide how to proceed." After hours of questioning, the council reached their conclusion. The presence of Ethan could not be kept a secret, after all, but he would not be held or investigated any longer. Immediately following the adjournment of the council, Alan addressed him directly, saying, "You are the bridge between humanity and the Carri. You carry their strength, their adaptability, and their mystery. What you choose to do with it will shape the future, not just for you, but for all sentient life." After that, Ethan met with Professor Zaro in his office, which, despite being normally sterile and quiet, felt charged with questions that were not spoken. Finally, Zaro stated, "You've officially become the one who is in charge of the situation." "What are you going to do now, Mr. Vane?" Ethan inquired with a devious grin over his face. Zarolo's expression softened and he paused, his mind racing. He was not a hero, a relic, or a savior. He was simply an earthling trying to find his place in the galaxy. However, now he saw potential in himself and the opportunities that lay ahead. "I'll keep studying," he said. "Finally, I'll learn everything I can about the Kiavari, about myself, and I'll make sure that I am properly educated." Ethan's life became a carefully organized secret that was only given to key scientists, and the days that followed were a haze as well. Some people were excited to collaborate with him, while others were concerned about the potential outcomes that may result from his flexibility. He worked with Zorak and the Council to identify his strengths and limitations, and he pushed himself to his limits in secure situations. Despite all that happened, Ethan remained unwavering in his commitment to his goals. When Ethan went from being a simple student to becoming a living testament to a species that had been forgotten, a sign of resiliency and potential, he found himself on an elevated pedestal at Tyler University. This occurred when he moved from being a student to being a living testimony. He had not had this sensation in a very long time, but as he stood there and gazed up at the stars, he felt it. Wednesday was when Ethan had first met Brooks, a young cadet. In spite of the fact that he did not know what the future would bring, he was well prepared. And for the very first time, he experienced a sense of belonging, not just on campus, but also globally. In the past, Ethan's days consisted only of attending lectures and working in laboratories. However, his days now consist of a blend of rigorous self-discovery and controlled teamwork. He started to test the boundaries of his talents with Professor Zaro's direction, and the Interplanetary Scientific Council conveyed the information to the rest of Tor University in a sensitive manner because of the nature of the situation. A subtle ripple effect was felt across the scientific community as a result of the news that Ethan had a genetic tie to the Kivari. For the purpose of the control trials, he was put through simulated extremes, such as radiation levels that are capable of killing the majority of living things, air circumstances that are poisonous to known species, and gravity pressures that should have crushed his bones. One thing, however, was that once his body adapted, it was almost like an instinct. After only one session, Ethan observed that he no longer needed to take the time to think about it. His body just responded to it. The expression of silent wonder could be seen in Zaro's 6 eyes as he nodded. The flexibility of the Kari went beyond just surviving. It was evolution. They were able to flourish in situations that decimated whole ecosystems. On a certain evening, while Ethan was getting ready for yet another council meeting, a message flashed on his holocom. The communication came not from Zaro or the council, but rather from Earth. The unexpected message came from Ethan's mother, and for a brief minute he was completely bewildered. "Ethan, are you completely fine?" she inquired. While Ethan glanced at the message, his mind was racing with the prospect that he was in danger. "I saw a news snippet about a finding regarding your institution. They suggested it could be tied to you. Are you in danger?" His mind raced with possibilities, and he crafted a carefully worded response. "I'm okay, Mom. It's complicated, but I'm safe. I'll explain everything when I visit Earth next break." The prospect of returning to his familiar surroundings, with all its everyday problems and familiar faces, felt like a relic from another life. But the thought brought Ethan comfort, regardless of his identity or place in the world. Ethan was confronted with the familiar faces of the other council members, who had developed a strong familiarity with him by the time the last council meeting took place. The emotions on their faces had become more serious, yet they no longer included any trace of mistrust. It was the alien delegate that took the floor first. "And I would want to commend you, Ethan Veen, for demonstrating really extraordinary tenacity and adaptation. In addition to posing profound questions, the link you provided to the Kivari provides solutions that have been searched after for millennia. During the process of adding the Kivari, the Zymon's crystalline shape shimmered. And I sense you pay attention to the detail. They have entrusted you with the obligation of carrying on their legacy, but with that comes responsibility. You may hear a tiny clicking sound as you lean forward more and more. You have been assured by the Council that they will not continue to imprison or investigate you, but they will take measures to ensure that your skills are not misused in any way. Additional materials that will assist you in comprehending your relationship with the Kivari will be made available to you by them." An overwhelming sense of relief washed over Ethan as he expressed his gratitude to them. The only thing he wants is to live his life according to his own standards, and find out how to do this as I go along. The glowing tendrils of the vortices pulse quickly. Ethan went back to school, but this time he did it with a different goal in mind. Zaro continued to act as a mentor to him, not just in the capacity of a professor, but also as a guide to help him traverse the complexity of his one-of-a-kind life. Immediately, he started exchanging his experiences and points of view with researchers from all across the galaxy. The following weeks were marked by a decrease in activity, with the role of the Council gradually receding into the background. When Zorro approached Ethan in the Arboretum of Biogenesis one day, his demeanor conveyed the fact that he was deeply contemplating something. He said, in a voice that had a rare tone of affection, "Are you aware of what distinguishes humans from other animals?" Ethan glanced up in astonishment, but Zorro corroborated his statement by nodding his head. Billy looked away from Ethan and stared at the pine trees and the forest, and said nothing. "Even without Kari characteristics, your species flourishes in ways that very few others do. Your spirit, curiosity, and tenacity are what make your species so successful." As the months went by, Ethan gained confidence in his abilities and his place in the galaxy. With the help of the Council's resources, he was able to trace faint threads of the Kari's history, which led to unexpected discoveries about their culture, extinction, and their decision to preserve their legacy. However, Ethan's journey wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about rivalry with the Kari themselves. Zorro's 6 eyes gleamed, suggesting that this influence may have been the reason their legacy ended up with us. Rouser descended when Ethan was standing on the observation deck of the university and gazing at the stars one evening. He thought of Earth, the galaxy, and the Kari, as well as everything else that had brought him to this moment. With the guidance of Zorro and the support of the Council, he began leading initiatives to investigate how adaptability could solve galactic challenges, ranging from environmental crises to interspecies cooperation. Ethan's name became known throughout Tyler not as an anomaly or a curiosity, but rather as a bridge between creatures. He was a cosmic entity with a profound sense of call, and Ethan Veen was more than just a human, or Kivari.